I finally got to ride the world's fastest dirt bike, and it's not what I expected. The Stark Varg is an incredible bike that shines a bright light on the future of motocross technology. It blew me away in some areas, but also made me realize why I wouldn't buy one. At least not yet. Let me explain. Today, I'm going to tell you about my first ride on the Stark Varg. I'll reveal my honest impressions of the bike, the awesome things, and the crappy things. I also want to talk about why I won't be buying one anytime soon, but at the same time, explain what type of rider I think this bike would really be good for. Is electric going to take over the dirt bike world? Well, there's only one way to find out. So let's see what the Stark Varg is working with. Grab your favorite snack and join me as we take a look at the world's fastest dirt bike. But before we get into all that, I want to give you a little peek behind the curtain and show you how I make these videos. I've experimented with a lot of different action camera mounts throughout the years. The top of the helmet, under the visor, even the nausea-inducing chest mount. But the one I've found that gives the most true-to-life view is actually the chin mount. I use the Dango Design Gripper chin mount, which has a key feature that sets it apart from the other chin mounts out there. It attaches to the helmet using this super strong clamp, which means you can quickly remove your action camera at any time to film your buddies, or even attach it to a tree branch and film yourself. And then you just clip it right back on the helmet and you're back to filming from your perspective again. Now, if you'd like to start filming your own rides the right way, you can grab yourself the Dango Design Gripper chin mount through the link in the description. And don't forget to use code SoupMoto10 for 10% off. Now, back to the video. Alright, so I just want to start out with some quick context. Before we get into anything, I just want to let you know this is not my personal dirt bike. I did borrow it from a buddy of mine, and just to be clear, it is the Stark Varg motocross version. I know they do make the Stark Varg EX, and that is the enduro version. It's a bit newer than this one. This one is the Gen 2 model, which means it was made in 2024. Also, just to clarify, my friend's setup, he had the 5 different modes, which we'll talk about later. He had them set up from 35 to 60 horsepower, and I'm going to explain what each mode was in the next segment, but I also just want to say he had the regen set at about 20%. Now you can change all of these settings when you get your own Stark Varg. So when I'm talking about modes, other people, they might have their mode settings differently. So just remember that as we talk about this in this video. Now the other thing I want to quickly mention is the owner of this bike did not buy the 80 horsepower Stark Varg. He bought the 60 horsepower. And the reason he said was because it's an extra $1,000 or whatever it was, but it's a decent chunk of change for that extra 20 horsepower, which is actually not really usable power at all. He said that everyone he heard from told him that the 80 horsepower is basically unusable, and I'm going to talk about it a little more about what I thought about the 60 horsepower, but I just wanted to let you know that going into it. So this is the Stark Varg MX model. It's the 60 horsepower and it's the Gen 2, so it came out in 2024. First off, I want to start straight away by just explaining what all of the power modes the owner had this bike set up in. So there's 5 power modes on the Stark Varg. You can sort of think of them like gears, but later I'm going to talk a little bit about why that's not 100% the case. Now, mode 1, he had it set up at 35 horsepower. Now this is kind of like a 125 two-stroke, similar power to that. It's manageable even at wide open throttle. Mode 2, he had it at 40 horsepower. You're kind of getting around the 250 4-stroke territory, pretty similar to that. Mode 3 was 45 horsepower, pretty snappy. The electric torque, definitely, you can feel it on this one. This is kind of like a modified 250F motocross bike. Then you got mode 4, which is like the 50 horsepower. This is kind of like a fast 250 two-stroke, or maybe like a stock 450 with like a different map or something like that. Then you got mode 5, which is 60 horsepower. Now this is the most power that this specific model of bike makes, and because of the way the electric bike delivers the power, it actually feels pretty violent.
Holy fuck, does this thing fucking yoink you.
It's like a wheelie machine. Even if you're sitting all the way forward up on the seat, the very front of the seat, it will lift you off the ground with just twisting the throttle. The reason I say that these modes, even though you can actually switch them on the fly, like as you're riding, there's a mode selector button. You can press the up arrow or the down arrow, and you can switch between these modes just as fast as if you're shifting gears on a gas bike, but it's not like that. Each of these modes is basically like being in first gear all the way through if you had like a 10th gear, basically infinite wheel speed the whole time. Obviously you don't have to shift, you crack the throttle, and it's all based on the amount of throttle you're giving it. So even though you might say switching between these modes is kind of like shifting, it's also not. It's different. It's kind of hard to explain. But basically you're limited on power. You're not really limited on speed. The numbers of the horsepower don't really tell the whole story. I tried to kind of compare them to like, you know, a 125 two-stroke is kind of like mode 1, go through all the modes and kind of like compare them to gas bikes. But at the same time, they don't really line up exactly, because the way that this electric bike delivers torque is completely different than gas bikes. Basically, the way that it's different is it has 100% torque all the time, even snappier than like a modified 4-stroke race bike. It's like insane the amount of torque if you crack the throttle wide open. Now, if you're in mode 1, for example, this happened on my track while I was testing it out. If you're coming out of a really steep hill and you're like trying to pull up the hill, if you crack the throttle wide open in 35 horsepower, it's gonna feel like that torque kind of dips off. It kind of feels like it's losing a little bit of power. Not really like a bog of a gas bike, it's a little different than that, but almost a similar feeling, kind of like that. If you put it in the different modes, like say you put it in this mode of 60 horsepower, you would still get that torque snappiness coming the whole way up out of that hill, even though it's a steep hill. So it's different than a gas bike. If you've never ridden an electric bike or ridden in an electric car or anything like that, it would be really hard to explain this, but it's basically like 100% torque when you crack the throttle. With that being said, there was a big learning curve that I think this would be the hardest thing, at least on the motocross track, to get used to when you're coming from gas bikes over to the Stark Varg. And this learning curve was air control. So on a gas bike, you've probably heard of like a brake tap in the air, or even like when someone hits a jump, you hear them crack the throttle wide open if they're gonna like endo or something like that. Basically what they're doing on gas bikes is they're using I think it's called like the gyroscopic effect of the rear wheel to control the way the bike is pitched in the air. So if you hold the throttle wide open, it's gonna bring the front end of the bike up. If you tap the brake and lock up the rear wheel, it's gonna throw the front end of the bike down. So that is why we do a brake tap on gas bikes. Now, on the Stark, this is where things get really weird, because think about it like this. If you go off a jump on a gas bike in second gear, and then you're leaning a bit too forward and you crack the throttle wide open to try to overcorrect that, you're still in second gear unless you shift it up to third, but realistically, you're not gonna shift the whole way from like second on your takeoff up to fifth gear. So you're limited at the wheel speed that second or third gear can provide. On the Stark, that's completely different. When you crack the throttle to adjust in the air on the Stark, it basically is like going from first gear the whole way to like 10th immediately. There's really no delay whatsoever because there's no friction, there's no like pushback or feedback from the ground. The wheel is able to just spin freely as fast as it possibly can, and you're not limited by what gear you're in. So because of that, you have that instant spin. It's very easy to overcorrect. The amount of throttle you might twist on a gas bike to correct your trajectory in the air, if you do the same amount on the Stark, you're gonna end up like looping out in the air. And it gets even weirder when you try to do like whips or scrubs. When you hit a scrub and then you crack the throttle to kind of bring it back around, it's gonna go even further than you thought. This is, in my opinion, the thing that's going to take the most to get used to if I ended up buying one, or if anyone ended up buying one coming over from gas bikes. On a motocross track, this ability to control the bike in the air. Now, the other thing is, this particular one that I was riding is set up with the hand rear brake rather than the foot rear brake. Now, you can buy it with the foot rear brake installed, but the owner ended up getting the hand rear brake because people he asked told him, like, if you've ever ridden a mountain bike, it's just like that. And it's kind of nice because you never have to take your feet off the pegs. Now, I want to talk about that a little more in the next part of this video, but that's another thing that you kind of got to get used to in the air when you're jumping this bike. If you have the hand brake, it's a little bit weird to learn how to brake tap with the hand brake rather than the foot brake. Now, it's not something you can't learn. It's just a little bit of a difference that takes getting used to. We're going to move on to talk about the chassis and the suspension. Now, this is where I think the Stark Varg really shines. Yes, it has tons of power. It's incredibly powerful, honestly. But where Stark really put a lot of R&D into, it seems, is the chassis. Now, the front suspension, it has KYB forks, which are the same as what you're going to find on the YZ250F, YZ450F, any of those Yamahas, the forks are the same. Oddly enough, it has a shock from an RMZ, so Suzuki. I'm not really sure why they did that, but whatever it is that they did, the suspension feels immaculate. This bike is pretty heavy. It weighs, I think, over 260 pounds, but it feels light while you're riding it. I think that has a lot to do with not only the snappy power that electric motor gives, but at the same time, the bike is suspended incredibly well. You feel super planted and locked into that bike because of the suspension, but also because of other things like the super wide foot pegs it has on it, and the fact that if you don't have to shift, so you never have to move your foot to a gear shifter, or if you get that handbrake, you never have to move your foot to the rear brake, so you always feel locked in and part of that bike. Having really good suspension also helps. Now, if you drop the bike on the ground, the weight is going to feel very apparent to you because it's extremely heavy, but as you're riding, it doesn't feel heavy at all. And all of those factors, like the handbrake setup, like the very wide foot pegs, and like the really good suspension, make that bike feel so glued to the ground, and it's insanely confidence inspiring. As I was riding around, I just remember constantly thinking about how it was so fun that you could just feel the flow on this bike. So where did I test this bike out? Did I put it through all of its paces? Well, I tried my best, okay? I only got to ride it one day of riding, but I tested it out on a bunch of different types of terrain. What I started out on was a little grass track I had because I thought this might be the best place to test out all the modes back to back. And it definitely was. And this was the first place that I really started to feel how that chassis worked. Even though there wasn't a lot of bumps, the thing still felt really planted in these turns, and it felt very confidence inspiring. Plus, I got to try out all the different modes. On the motocross track, you can see from the footage here, it might not look like your typical motocross track, but that's because a lot of the weeds have grown up. It's pretty one-lined right now, but this is my motocross track. It has full-size jumps. Normally, it's like the full width of any other motocross track you might go to. It's a similar lap times to regular-sized motocross tracks. So don't get it twisted. Like, this is essentially testing on a motocross track, even though it doesn't look like it. Like I kind of explained before, in modes 1 and 2, but mainly mode 1, it was a bit hard to get enough speed out of a 180 corner and hit this wall jump, and this other little sort of six pack of doubles, it was hard to hit that right out of the turn in mode 1 because it felt like the power was just kind of rounding off or peaking off at that 35 horse. So I found that the sweet spot on the motocross track was, like, for me personally, modes 2 and 3. Those allowed me to hit all the jumps. Some of the hard ones, like that wall jump or anything right out of a corner, was a little bit difficult to hit, but all the other ones were super easy in mode 2 and 3. Mode 4, it got a little tricky because it felt like there was just so much power, and my ability to, as far as throttle control goes on this bike, it's not all there yet because I'm still just getting used to how snappy this power is. So in mode 4, or the 50 horsepower, it just felt like I was kind of holding on the bike for dear life, and mode 5 was basically unusable for me on the track. The only times I really even kicked it up to mode 5 were just messing around, heading over to the field just to see how it was, and on that grass track, once again, just to see how it was.
2.5. Dude, leaning full forward, it still picks the front up.
Every time I put it in mode 5, cracked the throttle wide open, the thing was incredibly wicked. I mean, insane. But it's hard to say that that's usable for like any regular rider. The other place I tested it out was tight woods riding. I tried my best to find some pretty tight trails. Luckily, there's a lot of that on my property. And what's interesting is it does require precise throttle control. Because the motor is completely silent, it's something to get used to, but it's also a very interesting, I would say kind of a benefit. And this is one of the things that surprised me. Because the motor is silent, you can literally hear when the rear wheel breaks traction, and you can adjust the throttle accordingly. So in the tight woods, that was a unique tool that I had to like sort of draw on, being able to listen to that rear wheel and know whenever it was breaking traction, because like I said, I was still getting used to the throttle control. And in the woods, that instant torque really punishes your mistakes. If you accidentally crack the throttle a little bit too much, it will immediately break loose on traction. Where this bike did really good, and I wish I had access to this thing all the time because of how fun it was, on flowy single track. Holy crap, this was an absolute highlight. I just wanted to keep spinning more and more laps because the bike, the combination of the chassis, the throttle, everything about it, it just felt like pure flow on the flowy single track. Stuff that's a little more opened up, not so tight and technical. It was incredible. Now I did take it on my new little enduro cross / like logs crossing area, and the bike performed no problem. Surprisingly, the motocross suspension did just fine. It was able to cross all these logs and these obstacles that you might find in enduro cross. That was pretty interesting to me. But the most interesting thing for me, which I did not expect at all, was how well this bike did on hill climbs. Now, one point where it feels not so good is when you have to stop on a hill and then you have to maneuver the bike where maybe you're doing a pivot turn, or maybe you're just trying to like spin the bike around to get it to go back down the hill. It definitely feels heavy at that point. But even if you are completely stopped, what I did not expect at all was if you just give the bike 1 to 5% throttle, even maybe less than that, 1 to like 3% throttle, right? Just barely give it a little bit of throttle. That thing crawls and tractors just like my CRF 250F. It's crazy. And because you can hear exactly when that rear wheel starts to spin or break traction, you can roll off the throttle and get back to having that traction locked in. It blew me away on how good it did on hill climbs. I was not expecting that. Now, some of the things that surprised me, once again, we talked about that silent engine or the silent motor advantage where you can hear the rear wheel breaking loose. That's definitely a big plus. But the other thing that surprised me was this thing has a radiator fan to keep the motor and the battery and all the components cool. Now, the owner of the bike told me he had never heard it kick on. He said, well, maybe it's for charging at 220, like at your house or something. You can kick it on so that the bike doesn't overheat while it's charging. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. Well, I took it out and I rode around the grass track and I was putting, some decently fast laps. It was a pretty hot day. And then I went to try out my enduro loop. And as soon as I got on some little tighter, slow sort of like single track, the radiator fan immediately kicked on.
In mode 1. I kind of hear the fan. The radiator fan, I think is what it is.
So I think when you're riding motocross or you're riding anything that's more fast paced where you got a lot of wind coming around the bike and cooling that motor off, you don't ever really hear the radiator fan, or it never kicks on. But as soon as you slow it down and you try to go into some more technical enduro riding, you're gonna have that fan kick on. And it is pretty loud. It's not so loud that you can't hear the tires like I was saying, but it is pretty loud. Obviously, one of the surprises, I kind of expected this, but at the same time it did surprise me just how flowy this bike felt. But that flow factor of not having to shift, braking with your feet, those wide foot pegs, man, I wish I could take those wide foot pegs and put them on all of my other bikes because they were just so badass. But it just feels like when you're attached to that bike, every motion you make is just one continuous motion, like you're one with the bike. And that was really surprising to me. I know I'd rambled on here for about 20 minutes about all the plus sides and everything that's great about this bike, but I don't want to lie to you guys, there were a few downsides. Now, it's not the end of the world. Some of them are more than others, but for instance, the one thing that really bugged me was the front tire. I think it was a Pirelli Scorpion. They come stock on that bike. I believe the newer ones they changed to a different tire. That tire sucked. I don't know what the deal was because I'm pretty sure I've run that tire before. I think I have it on my CRF 250F right now, but I have mooses in that. But with tubes on the sort of hard terrain that I was riding on, it was more hard packed, not as loose. That tire, that front tire felt so sketchy. It felt like it was pushing into all the turns and it really did not feel that confidence inspiring. So I would change out the tires immediately, but that obviously depends on what kind of terrain you're riding on. But at least for the type of terrain I was on, it didn't line up. So make sure you know what type of terrain you're on and match the tires accordingly. This goes for any bike, but I just wanted to put that out there. The other thing, I didn't personally experience this, but the owner said that the stock tubes that come on the Stark are complete garbage. They're like paper mache. They make them so that they can save a little bit of weight on the bike, but I felt the tubes and they are extremely thin. He said the front tire tube was punctured in about 1 hour of riding. The rear tube, after a couple rides, ended up getting a slow leak, so he just replaced both with regular tubes. Another downside, obviously, is the weight. So when you're lifting it onto the stand, when you get stuck, when you drop the bike, when you're on a hill climb sideways and you got to move it around, the thing is heavy. That's a downside everywhere other than when you're riding the bike. It does not feel heavy at all while you're actually riding it. But the biggest downside, and we're going to talk about this a little later, is the range and the charging. So on the motocross track, you get maybe 30 to 45 minutes at race pace. Enduro riding, it's a little bit better because you're going slower speeds. If you crank the regen up, that might even help a little bit more, especially if you got a lot of elevation changes. On those downhills, your bike is basically regenerating power, but even in enduro, it's still limited. And the shittiest part is the charging takes so long. Plus, you either have to bring a generator with you or you have to find an outlet somewhere. And if you're out in the middle of the woods or at a motocross track, like, it's hard to find places to charge it. So can you work around it? Yes. But that's a really big downside, honestly, about this bike. Just to look at the bigger picture, I got a lot of comments on a short I made about this bike, and obviously there's always going to be those electric haters. They're the same people that hated on 4-strokes whenever they got more popular in racing. 2-stroke glazers, just to put my opinion out there, I love all types of bikes. I don't have one single favorite type of bike. I don't think that 4-strokes are better than 2-strokes or 2-strokes are better than 4-strokes or electric bikes are better than them all. I don't think that. I think each bike is a different tool for a different job. But with that being said, I did get a lot of comments of people kind of ignorantly claiming that the Stark Varg isn't a serious bike, it's just like a toy. And I'm here to say that's not true at all. It's not, the Stark Varg is not a toy. The suspension components are anything you'd find on the best bikes out there. It feels amazing chassis wise, and the capability of the motor is on par, if not more powerful than a 450, especially if you get the 80 horsepower model. But I don't know why in your right mind you would ever say that this bike is a toy. When you're riding it, it is seriously competitive against gas bikes. It's not weak, it's not gimmicky, it's not serious. All those misconceptions, they're totally wrong, okay? But, and this is the bigger picture, the battery technology is the limiting factor. It's just not there yet. Something needs to happen within battery technology for these bikes to actually be a solid option for every rider. Right now, there's only a certain small category of rider that these bikes actually work for. So for them to become widespread bikes that anyone can have, they need one of three things to happen. They either need the batteries to get much longer of a range on tough conditions like loamy sand, mud, or just like motocross tracks, or they need to be smaller and like hot swappable. I know some manufacturers are coming out with those sorts of things, but right now the Stark battery is not swappable. Or they need to come up with ultra fast charging. Right now, the price just doesn't justify those limitations yet for me. That's why I would not be buying one. If you want a lot more of a deeper analysis and breakdown about these bikes, and specifically about this battery conversation, I just want to shout out to a YouTuber named Shane Pinney. He makes so many good videos about the Stark Varg and the Stark Varg EX, and he made a video talking about the future of electric and the battery problem, which is where I kind of got a lot of these points that I'm bringing up. So go check out his video. I'll have it linked in the description, and if you are interested about the Stark Varg, check out his channel because he makes some excellent videos about it. Now, the Stark Varg isn't for me, right? But if it's not for me, then who is this bike for? Well, let's start out with pro motocross riders, okay? If these pro riders are doing anything like actual pro races, we're talking 30-minute motos, that sort of thing, the range on these bikes just make it impractical. Can you go out on the track and ride for a little bit at a time? Sure. Can you stick it on the generator at your truck while you're taking a break in between motos? Sure. But the range is just a little bit cutting it too close, especially for faster riders. When the bikes are being strung out at very fast speeds, that's what drains the battery even faster. So a slower rider, a C-class rider, a vet rider, just a beginner rider, or even like enduro riders that are just more average, not like A-class, pro level riders, whether it's enduro or motocross, the slower the rider, the more range they're going to get out of the bike. So if you don't plan on going and like doing barn burners on this thing and just holding it wide open everywhere, be honest with yourself. If you're a slower rider, and honestly, I fit into this category. For me, the range is not really an issue. I think if I got one, I would have really no issues with the range whatsoever, because I'm like an average rider. I'm like C class, B class, somewhere in there, right? If you're an older vet rider, you don't plan on going out and doing anything crazy. Once again, this wouldn't be a bad bike for you range wise. The problem is you have to have the budget for it. That's personally why I would not be buying one right now. But if you have the budget to go out and spend 15 grand on a bike and you like the electric technology, it's great. I mean, for a slower rider, for an average rider, it's great. Also, the other cool thing about it is that ability for customizable power. I mean, this is something that you sort of get on gas bikes with the mapping, but the degree of customizability on the electric bikes is just insane. I'd love to try out the Stark Varg EX, the enduro model. It may be even better for trail riding. That would be really cool. And another thing to remember is the zero maintenance factor, and literally zero, unless like all you have to do is change brake pads, change tires, and like, you know, keep the suspension maintained, right? That's all you got to do. I guess you're changing chains, sprockets, that sort of thing, but like you get the idea. There's no engine maintenance. There's no cleaning the air filters. There's no changing the oil. I take that back. There is changing the oil, but it's not often at all. It's just a little tiny amount of gear oil. And if that maintenance factor is big for you, that's another reason why you might want to go out and get this bike. Now, I'm not saying that the Stark Varg is better than gas bikes right now. Obviously, like I said before, each bike is a different tool for a different job. But for the right rider, if you line up with all those things that I said this bike is good for, it is an incredible bike. So if you can afford it and you've ridden it before and you like how it feels, I say go for it because it's really awesome. Personally, I'm super excited to see just where the technology goes in the future, because the future looks really bright and exciting. So like I said, my stance, I wouldn't buy one just yet. The price is holding me back. The charging, I would like to see a little bit more range out of it, or faster charging or something like that. But if any of you get the chance to take one of these bikes for a ride, take that chance. Ride the Stark. I mean, it's so cool. It's so incredible. So definitely give it a go if you get the chance. Now I just want to know, like, would you guys trade your 450 for this, or are you waiting like me until the battery technology catches up? Also, if you like this footage in the background and you want to see the raw GoPro POV without the commentary, drop a comment and I'll make it happen. Now, if you want to see more Soup Moto like this video, check out the video on screen now. Thanks for watching.